Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So guys, today's case is very interesting and I really want to know your thoughts on it because I'm not quite sure how I feel about it and I'm interested to know what you all think. You'll understand as we get a little further into the story. Today we are going to talk about a beautiful woman who gave her whole life to her community and the New Orleans Mardi Gras culture. We're going to talk about her horrific and brutal death on June 15, 2004, and the man accused, charged, and convicted of this disgusting crime and later released based on new evidence while waiting for a new trial. Now, as a side note, many articles say this incident occurred on June 14th, 2004, but court documents say it happened on June 15th, so that's what we're going to go with. But before we get started, guys, I am super excited to be recording this video with my brand new Canon M6 Mark II, and I'm recording in my new little space in my house, as you can see. I really feel like this makes everything official. I'm spending money on this, y'all, so it's official. If you have any tips on how I can improve my setup, or if you want me to change something, or you think it should be switched back to one of the other setups that I had before, please share your ideas and your comments down below. Let me know what you think about it. It's really a work in progress, and I'm just excited that everything seems to be, getting cozy in here. Before I get started, I want to say thank you to all of my new subscribers. I am at 90 subscribers right now. Welcome to our little family, guys. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. If you're watching and you have not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing to my channel, and please everyone like this video, share this video, and yeah, that's it. Okay, so let's get into today's case. I feel like it's very interesting because it's kind of like happening in real time, and I'm a little on the fence about something. So let's get started. I am going to share with you the details behind the horrific death of mother and daughter, Durelli Watts and Ina Claire from New Orleans, Louisiana, and Darrill Henry, the man charged with their horrific deaths. June 15, 2004 was just like any other summer Tuesday in New Orleans for Durelli Watts and the Duell Street community. But unfortunately, little did everyone know, this day would change lives forever. The morning of June 15, Durelli and her husband, Robert Gay, separately left their home to run some errands. Later that morning, 89-year-old Durelli Watts returned to her home at 1930 Duell Street in the Gentilly neighborhood of the 7th Ward in New Orleans. Durelli was well known in her community as the St. Francis of Duels because she had a heart for the people and pets. Durelli was known to give odds and end type jobs to young men in the community, like cut her grass, run errands, and she would pay them for their work. She was also known for feeding, all of the neighborhood stray cats and dogs. She just was a kind person with a good heart. Now, although this was a close-knit community where neighbors knew each other, the community was also known for its rampant crime and drug activity. Durelli's two sons, who were doctors that lived in Las Vegas, often pleaded with her to leave the 7th Ward Gentilly area, but Durelli refused to leave the community that she knew and loved. Durelli was known throughout New Orleans for spending decades as a seamstress, creating beautiful wedding gowns and gorgeous beaded ball gowns for Mardi Gras season. She had been sewing Mardi Gras ball gowns for 70 years. Durelli was considered the best of the best. Everyone in the community knew her work. She made elaborate themed gowns for the maids and queens of the Young Men's Illinois Club Carnival Ball. In her younger days, when she was more mobile, she would scour fabric shops looking for the perfect fabric, the perfect beads, the perfect everything that she needed to make these gorgeous, gorgeous gowns. But as she got older, she would order everything by phone and was known to buy the whole bolt of a particular fabric to make sure that she was the only one that had that fabric. She wanted to create one-of-a-kind pieces. Durelli loved beautiful things, and she just couldn't do anything cheap. She once said, "I only work with good stuff because if I'm doing it, it has to look good." Durelli's life and her family's lives changed just a few short hours after 10 a.m. on June 15, 2004. Police reports indicate that around 1 p.m. on June 15, 2004, Durelli frantically grabbed her phone and called her daughter, Ina Claire, for help because someone was attempting to enter into her home. Many believe the attacker was Darrill Henry, that stormed into Durelli's home on that Tuesday to rob her and ended up viciously and violently stabbing her 14 times. She was stabbed in the face, in the head, and in the chest. According to court documents, Henry stabbed Durelli, breaking 3 ribs, her sternum, and her jaw. Now, after the attacker stabbed Durelli, he doused her with some sort of gasoline or something to ignite a fire and set her on fire, attempting to burn her alive, and then set her home on fire. But before leaving her home, it's believed that the attacker attempted to clean himself up in the kitchen area, and then proceeded to rummage through Durelli's purse, which was found in one of the rooms in the front part of the house. Court documents and police records allege that the attacker was in the process of rummaging through Durelli's purse, looking for, I guess, money or whatever to try to rob from her, when he heard her daughter pull up to the house. Durelli's daughter and former school principal of Lafayette Elementary School and St. Mary's Angels Catholic School, Ina Claire, raced toward the house to see what was going on when, according to witnesses, she was met by Darrill Henry. Witnesses say Henry brushed past Ina Claire as she was on the porch racing into the house, and he was walking out of the house when he turned around and shot her twice. As Ina Claire lay dying on the porch, witnesses say they saw Henry bend down, place the gun barrel to her head, and shoot her again. Several neighbors heard these gunshots and saw the attacker leaving Durelli's house. One neighbor says she walked past the attacker, who she says was Darrill Henry, as he was casually leaving the Watts home. Another neighbor named Stephen Dominic, who lived directly across the street, says he looked out of his home window and saw Henry leaning over Ina Claire while she was laying dying on the porch. Dominic alleges that he ran over to the house as Henry was leaving. He also said that Henry was not in a hurry and pulled Ina Claire off the porch and across the street to avoid the fire that the house was being engulfed in. Now, I'm going to read some of the court documents that kind of detail these witness reports with a little bit more specific. So the first witness we have is Miss Garcia. There's Miss Garcia, Miss Davis, and Mr. Dominic, all of whom lived across the street from Miss Watts, testified at Darrill Henry's trial in 2011. Ms. Garcia testified that on June 15, 2004, she heard what sounded like a pebble hitting her house. When she looked outside, she saw a woman later identified as Ina Claire lying on Ms. Watts' front porch. Ms. Garcia grabbed her phone, and when she looked outside a second time, she observed a man later identified as Henry, standing next to Ina, looking down at her. Miss Garcia exited her house and began walking across the street towards the man, and he started to walk away. Miss Garcia stated she and the perpetrator, who she is alleging was Henry, looked directly at each other in passing from a distance of approximately 15 feet. She also said that he calmly walked away from the incident or from the scene. When she approached the porch, she realized that Ina Claire was bleeding from her head and called 911 before smoke began to billow from the house. Miss Garcia testified that the attacker, or whom she believed was Mr. Henry, was a black male with a medium build, wearing a Gilligan hat, a red shirt, and blue pants. She recalled having previously described Henry as wearing sunglasses. She testified that shortly after the murder, she saw a sketch of Mr. Henry on television and found it to be inaccurate because the perpetrator or attacker was depicted as having braids or dreads hanging down below his hat. She stated that because the perpetrator was wearing a hat, she covered the top part of each person's head as she viewed the photographic lineup on July 7, 2004. Now, here's the next witness, Linda Gay Davis. Miss Garcia's next door neighbor, she also testified that on the day of the murders, she returned from shopping and realized she had left her phone in her car. When she went back outside, she saw and heard Miss Watts telling a man who she later identified as Mr. Henry to leave her home. So she heard Miss Watts telling him, get out of here, leave my house, for whatever reason. When Miss Davis went back inside, she heard a shot. She then went to her front door and saw the man standing over Ina Claire and shoot her. The perpetrator, who they believed to be Mr. Henry, proceeded to dig through Ina Claire's purse before shooting her again. Miss Davis also called 911 and watched from her upstairs window as the perpetrator walked down the street, repeatedly looking over his shoulder. Miss Davis says she did get a good look at his face when she initially saw him on Durelli Watts' porch just prior to the shooting. She also says that he was wearing a red shirt and blue jeans, and he did not have a hat on or sunglasses at any point after that. She described his hair as in small jerry curls, and she recalled having previously described him as having like deep set eyes. Miss Davis testified that she was originally, kind of like afraid to testify or cooperate with law enforcement with all of this, but did so at the urging of her family after receiving the grand jury subpoena. And it should also be noted that she is a distant relative of Durelli Watts and the Gay family. She acknowledged that Henry was depicted as wearing a red shirt in the photographic lineup, and she believes that the picture of him was the same one previously broadcasted all over the news. So basically there's some discrepancy, or they feel like it was kind of like biased or whatever by showing him, in this picture all over the news in this red shirt, and then presenting him in the same way in this photo lineup. It's like creating a bias for the people who are looking at him in these photo lineups. And so that's where the attorney's issue is. So now we come to Stephen Dominic. He is another witness. Stephen Dominic is also Miss Davis's next door neighbor. He testified he knew Miss Watts her whole life, or his whole life. He came home from lunch on the day of the murders and heard gunshots from inside the front room of his home. When he ran to the window, he saw Miss Gay, who is Ina Claire, fall to the ground. He then observed a man who he later identified as Darrill Henry put a gun to her head and shoot her at point blank range. Mr. Dominic ran from the window to tell his parents, who were outside somewhere, to get in the house because he didn't want anything happening to them. When he returned to the window, he watched as the man walked off the porch. Mr. Dominic exited the house to help Miss Ginn, Ina Claire, and he saw the perpetrator across the street. Mr. Dominic then re-entered his home and called 911. When he came back outside, Miss Watts' house was totally engulfed in flames, and he thought he saw Ina Claire's head move. At this point, with the help of two other men, he says he went over to pull her off the porch and get her out of the way of possibly being, caught up in the fire. Mr. Dominic also testified that the shooter had a medium build and was brown complexion. He had small twists in his hair and was clean shaven. Mr. Dominic stated that the perpetrator, his hair was partially visible when viewed from behind. Dominic also says that he wore a red shirt, blue jeans, and he had a canvas hat on with a brim. Mr. Dominic stated that he assisted police compiling the sketch, but did not review the final version of the sketch before it was released to the world. He stated the sketch that he ultimately ended up seeing depicted the hat as being too small and that the hair was too long. Mr. Dominic identified Mr. Henry in a photo lineup as looking familiar. So on July 17, 2010, Mr. Dominic was in jail on separate charges, some serious charges, and was placed in a holding cell with dozens of other inmates awaiting a court hearing when Mr. Henry was escorted in. And Mr. Dominic testified that he recognized immediately who Mr. Henry was and recognized him as being the killer of Durelli Watts and Ina Claire from that day of June 15, 2004. He testified that he was afraid for his safety and told deputies what was going on at that moment, and deputies then removed him from that particular area where all of these inmates were. The jury in the trial did hear phone calls, recorded phone calls from Dominic talking to his family, where he was also telling them basically exactly what I just said, which was that he got put in the holding cell with all of these inmates, and then here in walks Mr. Henry, the same guy that he remembers as being the person who shot Ina Claire on the porch and basically killed Miss Watts and set her house on fire. So back to the story. Police arrived at the Dual Street home and found it basically covered in flames, as all of the witnesses have recounted. The Watts family dog, Misty, was found in the backyard dead from smoke inhalation. Now, Henry, who had already been in jail just 8 hours after the murder for public drunkenness, was officially arrested and charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder on July 7, 2004. During his police interview, he said that on the day of the murders, he was in the French Quarters job hunting. So detectives searched surveillance of the area of the French Quarter, looking for any inclination or any, proof that, Henry was there. They also reached out to the people or the restaurants and places that Mr. Henry said he went to looking for jobs. And all of the places that Mr. Henry gave did acknowledge that he was there, but they acknowledged that he was there later on in the day, not in the morning of June 15th or in the afternoon of June 15, 2004, around the time of the murders. So the night of Henry's arrest, detectives searched his mom's home where he was living at the time. They were unable to find any red shirts, which is the shirt that everybody claims, the person was wearing, and they all claim Mr. Henry had on a red shirt. But they did take away 2 pairs of pants and a pair of shoes. A small amount of blood was discovered on one of the shoes, and DNA testing was done and showed that the blood belonged to Mr. Henry. One article says that Henry's mom, Karen Miller, testified that he was home on the day of the murders, doing what he always did, which was drinking and playing around with the family kids. Witnesses, go back to the witnesses, they say Henry, who is known by the nickname of Short Story, was often seen at the Durelli's home, at Durelli Watts' house, walking her dog or cutting her grass for money to buy drugs. He, of course, denies this. One witness says everyone knew this was his daily routine, but Henry claimed he had no clue of where Durelli Watts' home was. On September 2nd, 2004, the Orleans Parish grand jury indicted Henry on the 2 counts of first-degree murder. The case was scheduled for trial on August 8, 2005, but was continued until November 15, 2005. The case did not go to trial until August 23, 2011, due to pretrial motions, delays, and ultimately the devastation that occurred because of Hurricane Katrina. On August 31st, 2011, Henry was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 life sentences. Henry later appealed his conviction, alleging that the photo lineups were suggestive, showing him in a red shirt, and because his expert's testimony was excluded from trial. Going back to the witness statements saying, that basically the photo lineup that they all saw had him in a red shirt. He's saying, his attorneys are saying that that was suggestive because the alleged perpetrator was already being shown to the world as wearing a red shirt, the sketch. On March 11, 2020, Henry's conviction was overturned and a new trial was granted based on DNA evidence that excluded Mr. Henry. On April 2nd, 2020, in light of this new DNA evidence and the present pandemic and its impact on prisons, bail was set for Mr. Henry, and his family was ultimately able to raise money or enough money to make his bail and to get him released. On May 7th, 2020, Darrill Henry was released on bond pending a new trial. Now, guys, after reading all of this and researching all of this, this is where I am so torn on everything that I've read on this case. I really want to believe that Mr. Henry is innocent of this awful crime, but I have questions. What do you all think about this? According to Henry's attorneys and the Innocence Project, who is helping Mr. Henry, the first eyewitnesses closest to the crime scene was shown an unbiased lineup a few days after the murders and did not identify Mr. Henry as the attacker. The witness later identified Henry while in jail after being arrested for a series of crimes. So this would be Stephen Dominic, who Mr. Henry's attorneys are referencing. One report says Dominic's attorney sought a plea deal for him in exchange for his testimony, but because prosecutors refused, that still did not change Dominic's opinion of what he saw on that day of June 15th. He still stood by his position that it was Darrill Henry who shot Ina Claire on that porch on that horrific day, even though his attorneys urged him not to testify. He did it anyways. As a result of him testifying and stating his position, he was targeted in jail. But like I said, he stands by what he says, that Mr. Henry was the attacker. So I guess my question is, why would Stephen Dominic put himself through this this craziness unnecessarily if he's lying? If he did not believe that the attacker was Darrill Henry, why would he put himself out there like this and be subjected to threats and being labeled a snitch and, all of this craziness with nothing to gain from it at this point, because his trial, him testifying against Mr. Henry did not have any positive impact on the cases that he was dealing with. So basically, the court ultimately granted Henry a new trial because the DNA evidence from Durelli Watts's fingernails and her wallet were not Mr. Henry's. But there's still these three witnesses who say they saw him talking to Durelli Watts on that day, walking away from the house on that day. Could they all be mistaken about what they recall? What do you all think about that? Let me know in the comments below. Even the part about, the DNA evidence under Durelli's fingernails. Durelli's sons say that her hygiene was suffering in her old age, and the DNA, sure, it could have been DNA from anyone underneath her fingernails. It doesn't necessarily mean that that would exclude Mr. Henry from being a person involved in this case. True, but then I have the question of why wasn't any DNA found of Mr. Henry in the house anywhere? Like, wouldn't there be something left there of him? Like, wouldn't he have cuts or something on him from trying to stab her 14 times? Wouldn't something be there from him, some DNA somewhere, be in the house if he was there at that time? I don't know. What do you all think? Durelli's sons don't necessarily think that, the DNA under her fingernails not being Henry's means that he had nothing to do with it. And like I said, being around elderly people myself, I believe it's possible. She was 70 years old. She wasn't in perfect condition. Maybe he didn't wash her hands. And especially since she was known to be around a lot of different people, if she was so generous and kind to let people do various odds and end jobs for her, maybe she trusted some of these people to that extent where she would be like, hey, I need you to do this, touch them or whatever. Or maybe she would allow them, hey, go in my purse and grab this. Although I think that's that may be a stretch, but maybe not. Some elderly people are like that. Hey, go grab my wallet. Let me, give you some money for what you did for me today or whatever. If she trusted the person, she was known to hire a lot of the guys around the neighborhood to do errands for her. So maybe she trusted them enough to ask them to grab her wallet. I don't know. What do you all think about that? Like I said, I do wonder why Mr. Henry's DNA is not found or was not found anywhere in the house if he did stab her 14 times and if he did throw some sort of gasoline on her. Where did he get that from? Did he bring that in? But I also question, he knew her home. Did he know where everything was? Where is any DNA evidence from this? It's difficult to have DNA evidence in this case, I think, because of the fact that the house was set on fire. Prosecutors believe that was the main reason why the attacker set the house on fire, was to kind of taint the crime scene. Obviously, there wouldn't be any DNA evidence. And I just wonder, did Mr. Henry go that far? Was it him who did this? Why is it that no one recalls seeing anyone else? They don't recall seeing anyone else on the street leaving Durelli's house at this time. They all recall Mr. Henry. And then I had the other thought, just 8 hours after this incident occurred, Mr. Henry was arrested for public drunkenness. Did those arresting officers notice anything strange? Did they see any cuts on him at that time? Did they see any blood on him? Did he seem to be disheveled? Where is all the information for that? I don't have it. And I wonder if that was even brought up during the trial. He was arrested just 8 hours after this incident. Did they see anything odd? I don't know. So the judge in this case says, quote, eyewitness testimony is at the same time the most trusted of evidence and too often the least reliable. In a case based only on identification, DNA evidence that indicates the possible involvement of one or more other parties, but not the accused, is significant. end quote. So basically, this is what prompted the judge to grant Mr. Henry a new trial, basically saying eyewitness accounts are unreliable, which I never really knew that. I kind of felt like those are reliable, especially when you have multiple eyewitnesses who are recounting or telling the same version of the story. That I feel like makes it a little bit more reliable than, say, just one person saying, they saw Mr. Henry. But I don't know. This judge seems to think different. He goes on to say that the jurors should have the benefit of this information to make their own decision. Basically, the jurors in the case should know that the DNA evidence that was found in the Watts on Durelli Watts's under her fingernails and on her wallet does not come back to Mr. Henry. That I do agree with. I think that information definitely should be made available to the jurors, and I think that they should be able to draw conclusions or make their own conclusions from having all the information. But I still, in my mind, am questioning why 3 witnesses all say they saw Darrill Henry, someone looking like Darrill Henry. They knew who Darrill Henry was from this community, saw him in Durelli Watts' home, saw him in her yard, saw him shooting Ina Claire. I just think that there could be a reason why his DNA isn't there. Obviously, if he set the house on fire, as well as, could be a reason why why this other person's DNA is on the wallet and under her fingernails. And I also have the question of his alibi. It's not too solid to me. I mean, police were able to question the places that he said he went to fill out job applications, but they clearly say he wasn't there at the time of the murders, and he wasn't there prior to the murders. So where was he? His mom says he was at home that day, but during what time? Did he stay in the house all day that morning, all afternoon? Like, where was he? There's still, like, it's an open-ended situation where she just says, oh, he was drunk at home drinking and playing with the kids. Well, what time was he home drinking, playing with the kids? You guys, this case is so interesting to me, and I really want to know what you all think after everything that you've heard so far. Do you think Mr. Henry committed these horrible crimes? I would like to believe that he didn't, but I just don't know. I just don't know based on what I know, what I've seen. Having worked for attorneys, I know they can skew events for or against someone for their benefit. I just can't get past the witnesses' accounts that are so very similar. Well, that's all I have for this case. I just really want to know what you all think. Let me know in the comments down below. I am definitely interested to see what the outcome is of his new trial, and we'll definitely keep you all updated as it progresses. But thank you all so much for watching. If you have not subscribed, please don't forget to hit the red subscribe button down below, make it gray, and don't forget to like and share this video. This case, guys, was so interesting to me just because there was a lot of certainty but uncertainty, if you know what I mean. I mean, it just seems so interesting that these witnesses all say they saw him, and that they know him, but he's just outright denying any knowledge of, like, he doesn't even know this lady. That's basically what he's saying. He has no clue who she is. He doesn't know anything about her, doesn't know where she lives. But these witnesses say that they seen him, or they saw him at her house doing little random odds and end jobs. There's just a little bit of a disconnect there for me, and I really want to believe Mr. Henry is innocent. Like I said, I do believe definitely that the jurors should have the benefit of all the information, and I guess we'll just wait to see what happens with his new trial. That's all I have on this case, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. And let me know what you all think about this case in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching. Take care and be safe. Bye.